Hello, and welcome to another episode of Household Filmmaking. I am your host, Christopher Moonlight Cooksey, and today I'm very excited to have a friend of mine who's a very talented writer, director, and producer. His latest short film, Control, was acquired by Dust as a part of their science fiction series of short films that you can watch on YouTube and on their app. And I'm very excited because Control is an excellent short film that I will link in the description, and I hope you all watch. I learned a lot watching it, and I'm excited to have Cary on the show. So, Cary, thank you so much for being on.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for all the kind words.
You're welcome. Okay, before we get going, I also want to encourage anyone listening to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/Christopher Moonlight for interviews, tutorials, film analysis, and all things related to creating story. So, Cary, again, Control. I got to watch that on Dust. And like a lot of things that you see on a low budget in a short film, you go, okay, let's see what this is about. And then I was completely blown away by this story that is, it all takes place in a single location. But that single location is on a moon of Jupiter. And you did it all with one set and one actress. And man, it was phenomenal. So, first, I think I'd like to ask, what was the original idea for Control? What made you think, this is a story I want to do and I can do it?
Yeah, it really stemmed from an actual event. Didn't take place on a moon of Jupiter, but there was a woman scientist at one of the Antarctic research stations, and she was a medical officer there, and she developed breast cancer in the middle of the Antarctic winter. So she was there more or less alone, and had to operate on herself in order to save her own life. There was no way to fly in any assistance at that point. So I got fascinated by that story, and I started with the idea of the sense of despair and loneliness and fear that must come from that, and then started to think about, well, how can I take that story and how can I kind of ramp it up even more, and moving it from Antarctica to 600 million miles away seemed to amp up the loneliness factor a little bit, and then the story just kind of began to evolve organically. So the basic story is about a woman scientist who's on a research station on Callisto, one of the moons of Jupiter, and her companion there has died unexpectedly, and she begins to either believe or realize, depending on your point of view, that she's not in fact alone there after all. And so that element kind of started to come about because I wanted to have this sense of loneliness and isolation, and what that would do to your mind, especially again if it was really dialed up to 11. So really, in the end, it's a story about isolation, but then it sort of incorporated elements of horror on top of the science fiction elements, and that's just apparently the way my brain works.
Well, it was very compelling. And, one of the things about it that I noticed was I know you, and I remember seeing you post pictures of the set in construction, and that there was not a lot of money to make this film. But you ramped it up to such a degree that at the moment of when there was kind of like I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but you convinced me I was going to see something that I had to kind of turn around in my logical mind and going like, no, if he shows that, then that blew the budget. But other people watching that don't think about the budget. And I'm sure that they were gripping the armrests of their seat, expecting something. But it was even more, you didn't even need to have that, though, because the idea of what she was confronting was very chilling. And like you said, you kind of play it as is this in her head or is this something external? And for me, it got to a certain point where I was like, no, there is actually something kind of messing with her. And but maybe that's just where my imagination took it myself. But
there are hints in there. There are hints as to whether this is a real thing or in her imagination, and I won't explicate what they are, but there are definite hints in there.
I'm gonna have to go back and watch it again. Now, so much of this, I mean, this is what was it? I think it was Robert McKee once said, like, no matter how big the scope of your story is always personal. It's however vast the setting, war and peace or whatever, but you're always focused on a few characters who are having to have their personal journey within the context of whatever it is. A base on a moon of Jupiter it's a very grand idea. You get the sense of, there's a base at home, billions of dollars of equipment, all this sort of thing. You did it on one set, and you gave your actress Jamie Page, right?
Yes, Jamie Page.
Okay.
Wonderful Jamie Page.
Okay, and I mean, you essentially gave her like the set, a chair, and a computer to talk to, and then she had to carry the entire film. And I think the short film is about 20 minutes long.
It's 14 minutes.
14 minutes long, but still, that's not like a 2-minute short that you're asking an actor to just kind of do a bit. She has to carry that entire 14 minutes and keep the audience drawn in. Now, you told me before the interview started that you wrote that role with her in mind. Is that something you do often?
It's for an actor like that I actually have a chance to potentially work with. The answer is no. When I write for for spec or on assignment, I'm either writing for somebody or I cast in my head just because it helps me to gravitate toward a particular voice. But in this case, I had worked with Jamie on the very first short that I wrote and produced, a film called The Borderlands, and we had cast her in a supporting role on that. And that was a different take on a zombie theme number of years ago now, and she had, I didn't know Jamie at the time, and she had auditioned and sent in a taped audition for us. It's a fairly extensive monologue, and sitting there watching it, I cried while watching this monologue, and I'm thinking, I wrote these words. I know everything that's coming. I know everything about these words, and she's making me feel this. She's really good. And so we obviously cast her in that, and she was phenomenal. And so when I started to play around with this idea, and more importantly, when I started to play around with the idea of, I think I'd actually like to produce this and, more importantly, direct it, and it was the first thing I had directed, I immediately thought of Jamie for the role, and am immensely grateful that she agreed to do it and that she brought everything that she brought to the screen. Consistently, the reviews and the feedback have focused quite rightly on Jamie's performance, because it really is a remarkable performance. She won a number of awards for it on the festival circuit when the film played on the festival circuit. Lots of wonderful comments in on Dust and on YouTube and about her performance, because it is. And even more remarkably, I'll give you this bit of behind the scenes. Even more remarkably, she was insanely sick the whole shoot.
Oh no.
She had just gotten back from China for some work, and she got a respiratory infection. And so we have lots and lots of footage of Jamie just giving these knockout takes. Camera stops rolling, or we call cut, the camera's still rolling, and she just breaks into these horrific coughing fits. but managed to consistently keep it together when the camera was rolling for 3 days straight, and actually ended up going to the hospital immediately after leaving the set on the last day of filming.
Oh no! Wow, you would have never known it.
No.
This is again an interesting thing. Now, I do want to talk more about writing, but I want to kind of get through talking about this film. You produced and directed this as well. And like I said, you had the sets built, which I want to talk about a bit as well. But just keeping with Jamie for the moment, what was the process like, giving her the script and directing it? Did you give her more insight into her character, or was it kind of a mutual discussion, or did she read the lines and say, this is how I'm going to do it?
Interestingly, so like I said, this was the first time I directed, and I was so terrified, I don't think is too strong a word, of the just the logistics and the physical process of directing and making sure all the moving parts were there, that I got very focused on that aspect of things. And again, thank goodness Jamie didn't need a lot from me. So we did do some rehearsals, and we had a number of conversations. And in some of her feedback, she had some feedback around, I think, and this is hugely important to me, being a male writer writing a female. There's a couple spots where she said, I don't think as a professional female, as a professional woman, this character would react in quite this way. And so we would work through some of those things and massage those things so that Jamie felt like what was coming out of her represented the character as she understood it. But the reality is that was pretty much Jamie just letting it fly. And she's a trained stage actress. She's primarily a stage actress, and so she came in, knew the script backwards and forwards, knew what she was doing, knew what her character arcs were throughout, and we filmed it in such a way that even though it was a short script and it was one set, we did not film it in order. Because of the nature of the set, and we can talk a little bit about that, but the nature of the set really required us to film specific setups because of the way that we had to create the set and place the camera and things like that, and do the lighting. And so there was, a fairly complex set of emotional arcs that she had to have mapped in her head as I'm kind of chunking her through scenes. And it's like, okay, now we're 4 pages later. Oh wait, now we're 3 pages back. Now we're here, and God bless her, she didn't kill me. We both came out of it alive.
Well, that is a mark of a professional, because the same thing happened on my first film, and I had mostly young actors who were pretty new. That they were very passionate about acting, but they'd never done a feature film before. My actress Kristen Koshel, it was her first lead role in a feature film, and the same thing with the sets that I had in my garage. And it's like we had to move things around to make it look like multiple tunnels rather than just the same tunnels over and over again. But I had to essentially map out the entire script and tell my director of photography, like, all of these can be knocked out in this one setup,
Right.
And then go, okay. But the actors had to, like you said, they had to jump around, and it was a bit, they would have preferred to do things linearly, but just the nature of it, we just couldn't keep, jumping back and forth, breaking down a setup and then resetting it up the exact same way again to do that. We just didn't have the time. So I think most actors, and you see it in behind the scenes. I remember watching behind the scenes of Lord of the Rings, the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, and them talking about how, like, oh, we did this shot, and then the following shot we did 6 months later, because the setups were, they were cranking through so much stuff with that ensemble cast. But yeah, I gotta say, a trained actor or actress is just invaluable to not just your story, but in terms of making sure that your set is running smoothly. If they know their job, like you said, you can focus on other stuff. But if you've got an actor or an actress that's hung up on something because they don't quite have it in their toolkit to give you what you need, then you have to stop everything and kind of spend time trying to figure out a way to get them to that place or figure out a way to shoot around it. So it always makes me happy to hear about consummate professionals.
Yes, absolutely. Makes one's life significantly easier.
So what about the set now? I remember seeing photos of it being built. Now, I mean, can you say what the budget was, or is that an under wraps? Like, I imagine you didn't have a lot to work with.
It was more than I wanted to spend. It was about, altogether, it was probably about $30,000. So it was not nothing. A lot of that, so we shot on a soundstage because we needed to build that set. And so, we had to rent the soundstage, and then we had to actually have the set fabricated. Worked with a really great group of a construction coordinator, and the construction crew did a fabulous job. In fact, they put that whole set together from scratch in 3 days. We had some production design issues. We had a production designer that ended up dropping out at the last minute. Yeah, I know. I know you know that feeling. Probably most low-budget filmmakers do, that having a key resource have to drop at the last minute. And so, basically we just scrambled, and fortunately we were able to pull it off. We went in on a Monday to load in. We shot for 3 days. We shot a Tuesday through Thursday. We loaded in on a Monday. And honestly, we rolled up the elephant doors, and I had no idea if there was going to be a set there or not. I genuinely didn't know. And, way too committed at that point to back out. So fortunately, we walked onto the set, and there it was, and they had done just an incredible job. It's all flats, and then various materials to create the illusion of it being a space station. We had the window with the translight of the surface of the moon and Jupiter in the sky outside, and I thought that ended up looking really, really good. I was really happy with that, how that turned out. But the set was essentially, it was a 360-degree set. It was all the walls closed. It was an octagon. All the walls closed. But we were talking about the whole kind of setup process and the need to film non-linearly. Because of the need to be able to move the camera and put the camera where we wanted it to be, at any given point in time, we took out about half the walls. We'd fly half the walls back. And so we were shooting in a particular direction, and then we'd shoot everything that we needed with those walls out before then turning around, for example, and doing the reverse, where we had to bring in the flown walls back in and take out a new set of walls. So that was the limitation we were working with. Each one of those setups was between, restructuring the set and relighting. That was 3 to 4 hours between setups. And we only had 3 days to film. So we had to really, when we were filming, really bang it out. But the set ended up being so much better, looking so much better than I dared hope. There was one shot in the initial cut, in the assembly edit, where it was compositionally a really good shot. I worked with a wonderful director of photography named Keith Jeffries, and compositionally it was a beautiful shot, but something about the lighting and just the angle or whatever, it was the one shot in everything that we looked at that was like, God, that looks like a Star Trek set. And so I had to take that shot out. I had to figure out something else to put in there, because it was like, that blows the whole set right there.
Oh yeah,
it blows the illusion.
You really have to be merciless too. It's very tempting as a filmmaker to see a shot and go, well, it makes sense if you think about it this way. But then you got to say, but the audience isn't going to stop, and they're just going to see the first thing that you saw, and they're not going to spend any time trying to justify it. They're just going to go like, oh, that looks like a Star Trek set. And then if you go on YouTube, I listen to a lot of different film analysis and reviewers and that sort of thing. And I find that there's whether they're good or they're just schlock people looking to get hits or something, like they'll be merciless towards your film. But I've also found that watching those reviewers be merciless towards other films, I get a sense of like, okay, I know what I can't get away with. So again,
Right.
it's the or I know how people are going to interpret it, because again, this goes back to you being a writer. Whatever you see in your head is there's a big difference between that and getting the audience, bring the audience into that world.
Absolutely.
And you can't fudge it. You can't try and justify it away, or whatever mistakes you make, or if the lighting's not quite right or whatever, you're you're going to take a hit.
Yep.
So but yeah, and there was something else I was going to ask about. Oh yes, the exteriors when she's looking through the camera, like when she drags the body out onto the moon's surface.
Yep.
How did you guys handle those?
So that was the very last shot, actually. So we actually took the translite. So we had this, gosh, it's probably 12 foot by 16 foot, maybe. And we had created this graphic and blown it up, had a company do it, of the surface outside and Jupiter in the sky. And it kind of went well below the window and well above the window, so that we could pan up and pan down and go up and down with the camera, and it would stay appropriate in the window. So when the time came to get that final shot of her outside, we took that translite and we actually constructed kind of a yurt with the translite, and lit it from behind and had her walk past it, dragging the body. So it was the same translite, only it was set up so that it was kind of in a 360-degree round, so that we could control the lighting on it, and it gave an illusion or a sense of depth to the two-dimensional image.
Wow, that's tricky to do. I mean, that's that's like that, and that's kind of like old school Forbidden Planet stuff as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's really awesome. So now you finished your film. You had you had to edit it together, and were you part of the editing process?
Yeah, so we had an editor, a woman named Marianne Smith, and she did an initial edit. But then Jonathan Levitt, my producing partner, and I went back through, and both he and I have some editing experience as well. After the initial edit, we got some initial feedback from some festivals, and we really felt like we might have better success if we found a way to trim, yet another 2 minutes, tighten it up a little bit. So we went back in, we did some re-editing. Also discovered as part of that process that I had screwed up as a director at one point,
Uh-oh.
and realized that there was a significant continuity issue. And so we re-edited and worked around the continuity issue that we had discovered as part of that as well. It was one of those where, like we were saying, filming from this direction, XYZ happened, filming from the other direction, somehow we didn't quite run the same sequence of dialogue, and I missed it, my AD missed it. That's the joys of barreling through the days like that.
Yep.
So we did a re-edit on it, really tightened everything up, took out a few moments just where we felt like we could ratchet it up a little bit more, a little less dead air. And there are moments that are very intentionally quiet, and I believe in the tension of silence. And so there's several moments where, we had long conversations about, could we trim, another 5 seconds off of this long shot where she's just staring at the camera? And I'm like, nope, that is important. That actually it contributes to the tension. We got to keep that, but we'll trim these other 5 seconds off over here.
Yeah, it's
So
funny you should say that because there is very much a fine line between when you're just kind of uh, giving the audience superfluous material, but also there's a time where you have to go, we're letting the audience live in this moment.
yes,
And
exactly.
and it's important to not just rush them through it. And it's really kind of an intuitive thing. You never quite know. And there's and then of course you've got to factor in music, whether it's quiet or if there's going to be music. Sometimes a scene that might seem too long before you add that music in works perfectly when you've got like
Right.
a little bit of a build to go along with that.
Yep.
And did you guys have a composer for the short, or did
We
you?
did, yeah. It's a composer named Jonathan Price, who I'm looking forward to working with on future projects. He and I stay in very close contact. He's really really exceptional, and he's a huge science fiction fan. We were introduced by a mutual friend, and yeah, he's a huge science fiction fan. So we immediately hit it off, and he loved the script, and pardon me, and came in and and I thought contributed a great deal. I mean, like you said, there's the music and the atmospheric sound elements like that contribute a huge amount, especially in science fiction and horror, where um, where not only are you playing off of sort of the emotional beats that you can contribute through the sound design and through the music design, um, but you're dealing with unusual settings that that sound design contributes to pretty significantly. Even just small things like in the background throughout the entire film, there is a sound layer of little beeps and boops and electronic things because she's essentially on a space station, and there's stuff happening in the background, and there's machines running in the background, and if you don't have that, it sounds very dead and lifeless.
It's funny too because most of the time, if you point that out to somebody in an audience, they won't notice it, but
Hmm,
they will notice if it's not there.
absolutely.
And
Yep.
that goes for not just sound design, but for little actor beats or props. I mean, there's so many times where I've seen people shoot their film on a budget where it's like they do everything right, but they won't do any production design. Even if they're just shooting in their home, they'll just have like a wall with just dead space all around the actor. Everything's lit right, everything's done perfectly, but they leave that dead space there, and it's technically there's nothing wrong with it, but just viscerally
Yep.
it just feels empty, and the audience notices, and that's part of what makes people are always saying they're looking for that cinematic look. Well, that cinematic look is essentially, don't just make it look like you put your actor up against a wall and
Right.
told them action. Make them
Yep.
look like that they live in that space. Again, talking with my friend Bill Oberst Jr. about a script that I'm working on right now, our entire conversation was really just based on drawing the audience in whenever you can, no matter what it is they're doing. And so in terms of, I want to kind of go away from control a little bit. And well, no, I don't want to go away from control just yet. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. There is one more thing I want to ask about control.
Okay.
But I'm excited because you are a writer and you have a very strong, disciplined understanding of writing. I do want to get into that, but I want to ask about getting control onto the festival circuit, and then what was it like when you were approached by Dust to acquire it for distribution?
Yeah, so the festival circuit is always a challenge. It's always a crap game. Like I said, so we did an initial run or initial set of submissions. I don't know, maybe 10 at a slightly longer length at about 16 and a half minutes, and we got into one or two of the festivals, but but we weren't getting the response we wanted. So we went back and we re-edited and we started a second round. We ended up playing in about 25 or 26 festivals here in the U.S., in Japan, in Singapore, and in Europe. And the reality is there are so many factors that go into programming a festival that the quality of your film, while an important one, is just one of many. How long is it? How well does it fit with the other films that might be in that same block or that are in that festival? Have they already selected something that's thematically similar? We played at Holly Shorts, which was a wonderful experience. Great festival, really, really strong entries. We played in one of the science fiction blocks, and I was blown away by the other films that played there. But we talked to the program, the festival programmer, who my co-producer knows, is acquainted with, and we were talking to him just informally out in the lobby at one point, and kind of said, did we get in because Jonathan? And he said, I know everybody. This is my business. If I was just letting people in because I knew them, this festival would be 4 times as long as it is. And he said, it can be. He said one year they had you probably know the Stephen King Dollar Babies. If you've never heard of those, Stephen King has a whole selection of his short stories that he will option for $1. There are a number of strictures on it. It's not exclusive. You can't monetize it, so you can play film festivals, but you can't make any money off of it, et cetera.
Right.
And it's great. It's a wonderful program. And he said one year they got 3 films all based on the same Stephen King short story. And he said, so, we had to pick one. Sometimes another festival I didn't get into, this one still breaks my heart. I did not get into Shriek Fest, which is one of my absolute favorite film festivals. It's a horror film festival here in Los Angeles. And I've been in writing competitions there for years, but this was the first film I submitted, and I didn't get in. And and what it really came down to was by the time we had submitted, and we submitted very late, and Denise Gossett, who's the festival director, let us submit late, but she said, the reality was she'd already programmed most of the festival, and ours was on the longer side at 14 minutes. And she just didn't have a block. She said she tried to move stuff around. She really liked the film, but she couldn't make the pieces fit to fit another 14-minute film in there. And that's the nature of the film, the film festival circuit. There's just so many different factors that go into it. We submitted in the end to about 75 festivals, so we had about a 33% success rate. That's a lot of festivals, and it's a lot of money. Even if you're submitting, most of those are relatively smaller festivals, genre festivals, relatively affordable. But that's part of the hard part, is you really got to sort of pick you got to figure out what your strategy is going to be. Is it going to be fairly broad based? If you're working in the genre, are you going to focus on the genre festivals? Are you going to, if you're only going to submit to Toronto After Dark and and Sundance and the 3 or 4 really big genre festivals in the horror film community, for example, your odds aren't good. There's just too much competition, and frankly, you're probably competing with films that cost 10 times as much as yours did.
Yeah.
So really figure out, what's my goal here. Our goal was to get seen. Our goal was to just get it out there in the public. So we submitted to a number of bigger festivals, and we got into some of those, but we also submitted to a lot of smaller festivals. Like I said, we played at a festival in Singapore that we saw the photos, and it's a bunch of folding chairs lined up in a room, but they loved it. So that's fantastic.
Well, an audience is an audience. If
Exactly.
they love it, it doesn't matter where they see
Yeah,
and you never know where your audience is going to come from. But if you get one, they can become fiercely loyal, and from there they're like little advertising nodes if they like it enough to
exactly.
talk about it. Funny aside about film festivals, you mentioned the getting three of the same Stephen King story in short film form. uh, I One of the things that I discussed with my friend Clint Carney, who I've also interviewed for this show, he did the festival circuit and he does visual effects. He and I both do visual effects. And one of the things he thought was really funny was, you get these, this isn't horror, but just like movies with people getting shot. He said you can buy these canned blood spray effects, blood splattering up against the wall or something like that. He's like, now it's like I buy those too, and you take them and then you change them, you alter them to get different effects, or you combine them. He's like, but so many people didn't realize that, so you would see movie after movie with the same blood splat hitting the wall, and it's noticeable. And it's a weird thing to have to think about, but yeah, going into the festival circuit, you have to really, especially if you're using any kind of canned element or stock footage or something
Yeah.
like that, you really have to be clever about it. You can't just be slapping that stuff in, because yeah, it's kind of like Roger Corman with his trailers, where they put the same helicopter exploding in every trailer. He's like, there's actually no rule that if you have a helicopter exploding in your trailer that it has to be in the movie, but it always made the trailer more exciting. And then if you watch, what is it? His 80s, both his science fiction and barbarian movies from the 80s. He got James Horner to do a great score for, I think it was Battle Beyond the Stars, and they just
Yep.
used that score and some of the spaceship battles in multiple different films. So every time a Roger Corman movie would start, it would start with the same music from Battle Beyond the Stars, and hey, it worked for him. But
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
there's so many. You're right. There's so many factors in the film festival circuit that you wouldn't think of when you just go to a movie theater, but it could just come down to if like you're like, oh, I'm in this time slot, and this is around the time that everyone's kind of burnt out and like tapping out early, going to their hotel room, or
Hmm.
looking for the bar or whatever it is. You could get in and still nobody sees your film because you got that wrong time slot. um but you guys did get distribution. You got Dust, which is
We did.
it's a very
We did. It was
well-known science fiction app and YouTube channel, and so when did that happen, and how did that happen?
so we had actually been approached by a different short film distributor coming out of Holly Shorts, which was immensely gratifying. As a filmmaker, we came out of the screening and this distributor walked up and said, "Hey, I loved your film. We want to talk about distributing it. Here's my card. Call me." So I called him and didn't hear anything back. And but I hadn't really honestly thought too much about distribution. The nice thing about these days is that there are avenues for distribution of short films, and of course that didn't exist even in a real way. It didn't exist, say, 6-7 years ago. It's really just been in the last 3 4 5 years that these things have really opened up with things like Dust and Shorts TV and Alter, which is also Gunpowder and Sky, same owner as Dust. Um,
And Shutter too, don't they do Shutter as well?
so I'm not sure if they own Shutter or not. They might. They might. And
I'm
they're getting really big now. They're actually doing full feature development and production now.
Yeah.
Um, but I actually approached Dust because I was a big fan of Dust. I'm a big fan of Dust. And so when I was not getting the response that I wanted, and it turned out that's because there was some people making career changes at this other distributor, and so we kind of got lost in the cracks. And by the time they came back to us, we'd already set up at Dust.
That happens
Um,
so often. I hear that story
yeah,
all the time.
yeah. So I reached out to Dust and I said, "Listen, I love the work that's on your channel. I'm a huge science fiction fan, have been my whole life. I've got this short. It's done pretty well on the festival circuit. Would love to have you take a look at it." And they got back to us almost immediately and said, "We loved it. We want to pick it up." Here's a contract. So, and then they did a really, really nice job, I thought, of promoting it. So we got some play. We actually got an article in IO9, a review on IO9. Um, and that really contributed to some hits and to some viewings. So really that was just kind of a really good timing. It was us making our own way in the world, approaching them, which you have to do. It's that's the nature of the business. You got to get out there and sell. But hitting them right at the right time when they were really expanding and looking for content, and they responded really well to the short.
Do they still talk to you? Do you ever have the opportunity to say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this next project? Is it something you guys would be interested in, or is it kind of...
Yeah, they do. They stay in contact. I found it to be a very friendly, very kind of almost familial feeling. Everybody that I dealt with could not be kinder. And in fact, I'm right in the process of the writing process of turning Control into a feature.
Oh, wow.
So hoping to set up some conversations with them in the near future about that.
So when you talk to them, do you discuss things like, one of the things that I'm always trying to kind of get out of people is things like, what's a maximum budget? It's like, here's an idea I have. Would you guys be interested in it? Yes, that's something we could sell. Okay, what's the maximum budget that I can go for before I'm spending way outside of what could possibly ever come back? And I know there's no straight answer for that, but sometimes people are helpful that way. Sometimes they say, like, yeah, we'll be interested in this, but if you think you're going to do it for this much money, you're crazy. But if
yeah, for the record, I haven't had those conversations with the folks at Dust, although fingers crossed I will one of these days. But I have had those conversations with lots of distributors and sales agents on other projects that I produce. It's an equation. I mean, that's the part that's really kind of hard to stomach when you come from the creative background. But then when you get to the business side of things, it is a series of equations. It is who's starring in it, because we know they know, like, to the penny, this is how much this star is worth in these various markets. And so if you are trying, for example, to do pre-sales, which pre-sales are almost entirely dead at this point anyway, but
yeah,
if you're trying to do pre-sales, you got to keep your budget under this, because this is how much money we're going to be able to pre-sell this for in non-US markets. For example, I've had lots of conversations that revolved, why is this budget, what's your below the line budget? Why is it that high if you're telling me that you're going to film in Mexico? Well, for XYZ reasons. Well, if we were going to do it, we would need to bring that down to this, and we'd need to cut the number of shooting days down to this. And it's the people that know what they're doing, it's impressive in a way. I was having a conversation with a producer and a director one time. We were just having dinner, and the director was working on a new project, and the producer said, what's your budget? And they told him budget. Said, so you are doing a 23-day shoot, right? And the director said 24 days. Yeah. I mean, so this guy knew based on the description of the film and what the budget was, he knew within a day how long the shoot was going to be, because he knows how much it costs per day to film that kind of movie.
That's funny.
It's impressive in its own way.
Oh, it is. And I mean, personally, I kind of love those kind of limitations. I find that I meet so many people, and I'm going to kind of start to bring it back around to writing. But I meet so many people who are just like, they give me these scripts, and the scripts are full of ideas. There's all the, and they're like, and they say, like, well, my creative writing teacher told me, get it all out on the page and then figure out what you can and can't do. And I've never written that way. I've always written specifically around what I know is available to me and what I can do, and nothing more. And I've had, I mean, nothing wrong with it, because I'm talking about, people that I work with. I'm not bagging on them or anything. It's just my personal way of working. But I remember when I was doing my first feature film. Originally, it was going to be I was going to produce it. Someone else was going to direct it, and they wanted to write the script. And I said, okay. I said, you can write the script, but here's the treatment. I need you to stick to this treatment. And I said, this is what's available to us. So we have a house, we have a set, and we've got the exteriors in this location. That's what's available to us. He comes back with a police precinct with extras and an interrogation scene that had nothing to do with what I put in the script. And I was going like, why is this? Well, I think I can get us an office that we can kind of dress up to look like a police precinct for free. And I was like, well, it's great that you can get it for free, but that's going to add more travel. I'm going to have to cater that. I'm going to, it's just like, so, and it really just came down to, I guess I have a producer's mind as well, but at the same time, it's exciting to me to tackle a script going, this is it. This is what I've got. What can I do with it? And I find that, the more you kind of live in that environment, and I use my own house to shoot in, so I literally lived in that environment. But, it's like the more you kind of limit yourself to certain things, you can live in that environment and learn it and find out more about it. And that, to me, brings out the creativity, where I find that, some people are just like, they open their script with like the giant space age city of the future, just like these very grandiose things. And yeah, it's almost like having too many ideas is the same as having no ideas.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. It's, some of it in terms of the scope, some of it really is who are you writing for, or what are you writing for, if you will, in that, if you're writing for a studio, or if you're writing to try to sell to a studio, there has to be a certain sense of scope. That's the kind of movies they make. And I've gone in and pitched to studios with some of my scripts that were smaller and have them kind of say, this feels like an indie. This feels small. This feels contained. And it's like, yeah, that's a fair knock, because that's not the kind of movie that studios want to make. It's not the kind of movies that studios sell, is why they don't want to make them.
And to be clear, they're not slighting you when they say that. It's no. That's the business aspect of it.
Absolutely, exactly. There are things, there are elements, there are tones that you need to include if you're writing for a studio versus writing for a even a mid-level budget, which I was going to say is dead, but actually starting to come back a little bit, versus writing for an indie budget. And I've kind of written for all of those levels, and it's a different discipline in each case. It's a different way of thinking about story. A couple of things that I've written recently are very intentionally highly contained, one set or at least one location, maybe sometimes outside of that building, in the parking lot or whatever, or one scene outside of it, just to open up the world a little bit and make sure that you're kind of positioning the story in the real world. But that's a very different thing than writing an action film for a movie star, where the sense of bigness, the sense of scale is part of what sells. Nobody wants to see a James Bond movie that is all set in his house. You could probably make a really cool film, some story about a secret agent who, for whatever reason, it's all within his house, he can't leave. That's great, but that's not James Bond.
Right.
And so you got to be thinking about the audience that you're trying to write for. And by that, I honestly mean, who are you hoping will buy the screenplay? Who are you hoping will give you money? And if it's for the independent market and the lower budget producer, the $1 to $2 million range, or the $3 to $5 million range, that's a very different kind of story than if you're trying to write for the $12 to $15 million range, which you can do sort of indie action, indie science fiction at that range still, depending on who your star is, if they're not eating up the entire budget. And then you're jumping to 50 plus million beyond that, and then kind of all bets are off. So
Yeah, and
you can write whatever the hell you want.
it's tough too, because there's kind of, these days there seems to be kind of a gap in that you can do an indie film and it's like you can budget up to a certain amount before you're not going to see a return. And that's kind of like you're guaranteed to only get into the VOD, maybe, like a theater here and there, just, on the East Coast and the West Coast and a few in between for like a week. And then there's kind of this area where it's like, up to about $3 million, where it's like you're too high of a budget to be a profitable indie, but you're too low to appeal to wide theatrical release. So this kind of, like you said, that kind of mid-level where it's like a no man's land.
Yeah.
And then you get to what I call like the Blumhouse level, where they're great. They're like, I think they just did like the Invisible Man for $7 million, something like that. And I can't remember what they made. For some reason, my brain's going, they made over $100 million, but that might be me just fantasizing. But they did great.
It was successful. It would have been even more successful if it had come out, if it hadn't come out right as the theaters were shutting down. But it did tremendous business.
Exactly. And now, because of all the things that are going on with the studios shutting down and that sort of thing, it's the studios have lost so much money. The $250 million film is probably a ways off from being seen again. They're going to be looking for ways to scale down. But at the same time, with technology and, cameras getting less expensive and special effects getting more accessible, we've got things now like the LED screens with Unreal Engine, where they're not green screening people. They're literally just not projecting, but it's like rear screen projection.
Yeah.
And that's got to save a lot of time in doing different setups. If you could just go like, okay, call up this set, or so there are going to be ways to do that. And like myself as an independent producer, I mean, I'm terrible at dealing with bureaucracy. That's why I became an independent film person. It's like, I don't want to deal with red tape. Wait, that's going to cost a $100,000 to make. I can do it for $2. Sort of guy. And, I'm exaggerating, but it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens. It'll kind of be interesting to see if independent filmmakers get a little more attention now, because the studios are going to need people who can think on a budget mindset but still have grand ideas. I was always impressed with Robert Rodriguez, who was just like, green screened, this is it, man. We can do so much for this, or so much with this. Anyway, I did Control or your other projects. I mean, have they got you more attention? Do you kind of gain more credibility now?
Yeah, absolutely. Everything that you put out there that is even moderately successful feeds into the next thing. A lot of my stuff, a lot of my written stuff hasn't, or still hasn't, maybe may or may not someday actually make it to the screen. And that's part of the business of being a screenwriter too, is only a fraction of the stuff that gets picked up actually then gets made. But it's about building credibility, building relationships, and that leads you to the next piece of work, and that leads you to the next project. And there's the aspect of being a writer and a filmmaker of sort of the DIY, independent route. And so I have projects that I work on that I am producing myself, and going out there and raising the money, or getting the relationships with the distributors and the sales agents and et cetera. And then there's the projects where I'm just trying to sell the script and it's selling the script and just, I'm getting writing on assignment. And those are two very different aspects of the business, and two very different ways of thinking about writing. Because if I'm writing for a project that I know that I'm producing, kind of to your point earlier, then I know that I'm thinking, okay, how am I going to achieve this based on the resources that I have access to, not just money, but locations and relationships. How am I going to achieve this? Can I? Do I want to? Is that really where I want to spend the money on this? Because I know what that'll do to a budget at this particular scene. No, okay, let's get rid of that scene or set it in a different location or whatever the case may be. And that's very different than kind of either being brought in and being given the guidelines of what to write, or writing purely on spec, and just being able to kind of write what you want, again, depending on who you think you're trying to sell it to. I've written stuff that very intentionally was geared toward the studios, and I've written in terms of spec work that I'm trying to sell, and I've written work that's very intentionally geared toward lower budgets and independent production companies and independent financiers. And that's, like you said, that's kind of in the 1 to 3 to maybe 5 million range. And the more you do it, the more you start to kind of just internalize what that means and what things, I don't want to say what things cost, but I think it might have been in William Goldman's Adventures in the Screen Trade, or is one of the screenwriting books, talking about how if you write a scene and the opening of the script is Central Park in New York and a herd of 1,000 camels comes charging over the top of the hill, if that's me writing that, an executive is going to read that first opening scene and throw the script in the garbage, because he's going to say, this person has no idea how much it would actually cost to film that. And so that tells me they don't know what they're doing. If you're William Goldman and you write that, they keep reading because they know you're William Goldman and they know what that means, and there's going to be a payoff to that someplace, because you have the credibility. They know that you know what you're doing, and they know what you're asking of them if that's your opening scene. So you start to adjust your mind sort of based on your intentions with the script.
I'm glad you brought that up, and because this is going to lead to what'll be my final question, but then we're going to move on to the post show. But in all instances of writing a script, whether it be a spec script or an assignment, or whatever the situation may be, there's always got to be an access point to the story that you're writing. I find when you're writing for somebody else, they say, hey, we need a story about this. And I've done this to other people before too, so I understand when I'm asking them is not an easy thing. But, all writers must find, like I said, that access point to what you're creating. If you're given an assignment, they say, hey, we need, a story about a UFO that drops 1,000 camels on Central Park and what ensues from there. When you sit down to do something like that, where do you find that you're usually coming from? Is it a place of your personal values, or do you put yourself in that setting and wonder how you'd react, or do you have everybody's got something different, but how do you do that?
A lot of it depends on what I'm given. If primarily what I'm given is, listen, I got this scene of a UFO that comes and drops 1,000 camels into Central Park. And I had an assignment like that where, I was basically told, here's the setup. I wasn't given, it was up to me to come up with the rest of the actual story, but here's the setup. In the camels in Central Park, I mean, you immediately go into plot mode, or at least I would go into plot mode, because that is a plot moment. That is an occurrence that immediately makes you go, why did a UFO have a bunch of camels, and why are they dropping them in Central Park? And what would happen if 1,000 camels got loose in Central Park? So you begin to build from plot. There's been other stories like that one assignment I just mentioned. There were I was given just the sort of the barest outline and the barest bones of the idea, but the idea was inherently character oriented. It was essentially a drama, and it was everything about the idea was begged the question, what is the emotional response of the main character to this situation? And so that's a very different kind of process than what happens when 1,000 camels are let loose in Central Park. So a lot of it really just depends on the nature of, and even on the spec side, it's the same question. When something pops into my head, what is it that resonates with me for that particular idea? Is it the story? Is it the imagery? Is it a character or characters that I just want to get to know better, and hopefully other people want to get to know better? So much of it really just depends on the nature of the core idea. But I think, to your point, the most important part is that you find that access point. If you don't have that access point, if you don't have that connection to the material, what you write will not be good. That's just a truism that you can take to the bank, because it won't resonate with you. It won't excite you. It won't involve you. And I've turned down work, and it's hard to turn down work, but I've turned down work where I said, here's how I would approach this story. And they've said, yeah, that's not how we want to approach it. And I'm like, well, that's how I would approach it. And I can't find my access point to the way you want to approach it. So I'm not the right writer for that job.
Yeah.
You got to be willing to do that, because otherwise you're just going to make yourself crazy and you're going to make them crazy.
I'm glad you said that, because I've found that the people that I work with most successfully with, there's kind of a mutual sharing of, like, you don't have to agree on everything. As a matter of fact, I think no matter who you work with, there's always going to be a tug of war over some point or another. But if you generally both have a shared interest in the direction you're going, it'll be a good relationship. But like you said, yeah, some people are just like, they already see the story in their head. Somehow they think that's just going to leap from their brain to the writer and it'll all work out. But that's never going to work out. You really do have to find someone that will share the excitement for the destination. It's like saying, like, I want to go to Hawaii. Well, I want to go to Vegas. Well, you're going to have to.
We got a problem here.
Yeah, exactly. Because not only is it completely different directions, well, from where you are, you're in California, but, there's completely different modes of transit as well. So,
absolutely.
So it's, that's the best that I can come up with that. But I think this has been a great conversation. It went by really quick too. We're having a good time here. We are going to move this over to the Backyard Indies after show, which is on my Patreon, patreon.com/Christopher Moonlight. This Patreon exclusive, it will get released like in a year or so when I remember to do it. But if you're a Patreon supporter, you get to listen to where this conversation goes next right now. So Cary, hang on the line, and I want to thank you again so much for your insight. I feel like we barely scratched the surface, really. This is, you can keep diving really deep into this. But before we go, is there anything else you'd like to say to the audience?
Not really, other than the usual cliches of, it's success in this business is all about perseverance and productivity. You can't quit. If you don't quit, you've beat 95% of the people that even try, and you got to keep working. You can't spend 10 years on one script, for example. And I know people who've done that, because that's not the way the business works. That's not to say you just blow through stuff, but get a script done. Speaking with my writer hat on, get a script done, get it complete, get it polished. Move on to the next project, get it out there, then let it take its post completion life on, and you move on to the next creative project. If you don't do that, the nature of this business is just such that you will not make any progress. You got to keep swimming. It's all about the sharks.
I think artistically and spiritually that applies as well.
Absolutely.
So, well, Cary, thank you very much. We're gonna leave off and pick right back up. So, thank you again to all of my listeners and Patreon supporters. We'll be back again soon with more great interviews. See you later.